My name is Ethan Carter. I'm 32 years old. 5 years ago, my mother said 7 words that quietly detonated my entire understanding of family. Don't come home this year, Ethan. 3 days before Thanksgiving. No warning, no discussion, just a decision already made. Claire doesn't want drama. She's pregnant again. We need to keep things calm. Calm, apparently. My presence counted as a disturbance. I remember standing in my Boston apartment with a half-packed suitcase on my bed and a non-refundable ticket to Connecticut sitting on the kitchen counter. 27 years old, still believing that maybe this year would be different. It wasn't. I spent that Thanksgiving alone at a restaurant, surrounded by families who passed plates like they belonged to each other. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was used to it. I wasn't. What I didn't know was that the strangers at the table next to me would become the only real family I'd ever have. What I didn't know was that, 5 years later, at my wedding, they would be introduced as the parents of the groom, while my biological parents stood in the back, uninvited, watching themselves be replaced in every way that mattered. Before I take you back to the phone call that changed everything, let me say this: if you've ever felt like the extra chair at your own family's table, this story might hit close to home. If it does, consider liking and subscribing. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time is it there right now? I remember exactly where I was when my phone rang. November 21st, 3 days before Thanksgiving. I was standing in my studio apartment in Boston, staring at an open suitcase on my bed. I'd folded everything with unnecessary precision: jeans stacked, sweaters rolled, dress shirt laid flat on top. Like if I packed carefully enough, the trip would go smoothly. Mom's name lit up my screen. I almost didn't answer. We didn't talk often unless something had already gone wrong. Hey, Mom. Ethan. Her voice was flat. No warmth. No small talk. I need to tell you something. That tone, I felt it in my stomach before she said another word. What's wrong? Is Dad okay? Your father's fine. A pause. Controlled, measured. Don't come home this year. Silence. I actually thought I misheard her. What? Claire doesn't want drama, she continued. She's pregnant again. And the doctor says she needs to avoid stress. We're keeping things calm this year. I gripped the phone tighter. Drama? I haven't even spoken to Claire in months. Exactly, she said sharply. Let's keep it that way. I stared at the wall across from me. The one with the framed architectural sketches I'd done in college. Lines, structure, things that made sense. How am I drama? I asked, keeping my voice level. I'd learned early that volume only made things worse. You know how you get, she said. How I get. You push. You ask questions. You make everything into a discussion. Claire doesn't need that right now. Last year I'd asked why I hadn't been invited to her baby shower. That was the drama. I already bought my ticket, I said. Then get a refund. It's non-refundable? That's not my problem. There it was. Clean. Simple. Mom. I tried one last time. It's Thanksgiving, and we're doing what's best for the family. Her tone hardened. You understand. The call ended before I could answer. I stood there. Phone still pressed to my ear long after the line went dead. The apartment felt smaller. Quieter. I looked at the suitcase. 27 years old. Successful enough to live on my own. Old enough to know better. Still surprised. I called my dad. He picked up on the 4th ring. Hey, kid, he already knew. Did Mom tell you? I asked. A pause. I could hear the TV in the background. Football. She mentioned it, and another pause. You know how your mother is, Ethan. She's just trying to keep the peace by uninviting me from my own family's holiday. It's not like that. Then what is it like? Silence. The kind that says more than words ever could. Dad, I said, my voice lower now. Do you want me there? 5 seconds? 10. I could picture him in his recliner, rubbing his forehead, staring at the screen instead of dealing with me. I think, he finally said, it's better if you listen to your mother this year. Something inside me went very still. Not explosive, not dramatic. Just quiet. Okay, I said. Ethan, don't make this bigger than it is. It's fine. I hung up. He didn't call back. I stood in the middle of my apartment as the late afternoon light faded through the window. My father had been given one simple choice. Not between me and Claire. Between silence and courage. He chose silence. And for the first time in my life, I stopped pretending I didn't notice. I wish I could say that phone call shocked me. It didn't. It confirmed something I'd been trying not to name for most of my life. This wasn't about one holiday. It was a pattern. 27 years of it. When I was 16, I planned my own birthday party, nothing big, just 3 friends, bowling, cake afterward. I remember ironing my shirt that afternoon, trying to look older than I felt. An hour before everyone was supposed to arrive, Claire called home crying. She'd broken up with her boyfriend. My mother canceled my party without asking me. "Your sister needs us more right now," she said, already grabbing her purse. Dad clapped my shoulder on the way out. "We'll reschedule, champ." We never did. I told my friends something came up. I spent that night in my room, listening to the house go quiet after they came back from comforting her. "Don't be selfish, Ethan. You're stronger than she is. Be the bigger person." That became the script. Then there was my college graduation. 4 years of scholarships, part-time jobs, nights drafting blueprints until 3 in the morning. I graduated with honors. First in the family. I scanned the crowd when they called my name. 2 empty seats. They arrived 2 hours late. Claire had a prenatal appointment that couldn't be moved. "You understand," Mom said when they finally found me outside the auditorium. "The baby is more important than a ceremony. More important than me." She didn't say it outright. She didn't have to. I learned early that protesting only made things worse. "You're too sensitive. Why do you always take things personally? Stop making everything about you." So I adjusted. I became useful instead of emotional. I helped Dad with yard work without being asked. I drove Claire to appointments when her husband couldn't. I fixed things around the house. I stayed quiet at dinner when conversations shifted away from me. If I took up less space, maybe I'd fit. If I asked for less, maybe I'd be easier to love. By 27, I had perfected the art of not being a problem. And it still wasn't enough. Sitting on the edge of my bed that night, staring at a plane ticket I couldn't use, something finally clicked into place. It wasn't that I was too much. It was that I was convenient to sacrifice. Claire's emotions mattered more. Claire's milestones mattered more. Claire's comfort mattered more. And every time there was a choice to make, I was the adjustable piece. The expendable one. For years, I told myself it was temporary, that once things calmed down, once the baby was older, once life was less stressful, there'd be room for me again. But staring at that suitcase, I realized something that felt both humiliating and freeing at the same time. There was no version of me small enough to finally earn my place at that table. Thanksgiving morning came in gray and quiet. I woke up before my alarm. Out of habit, for a few seconds. I forgot. Then, I remembered. I wasn't going anywhere. Through the thin walls of my apartment building, I could hear movement. Doors opening, laughter in the hallway. Someone arguing about whether they'd forgotten the cranberry sauce. Above me, a kid ran across the floor. Heavy footsteps followed by a woman's voice pretending to scold him. The smell hit around 10. Stuffing. Butter. Roasted turkey. It drifted through the vents like a reminder. I made coffee, burned it slightly because I wasn't paying attention. Stood by the window and watched snow gather on parked cars below. The street was empty, but the world wasn't. My phone stayed silent. No happy Thanksgiving. No, "We miss you." Not even a guilt text. Around noon, I made the mistake. I opened Instagram. Claire had posted 20 minutes earlier. The whole family around the dining table, Mom at the head, Dad carving the turkey, Claire glowing in maternity softness, her husband beside her, their toddler in a tiny flannel shirt, everyone leaning in, everyone smiling like it was effortless. Caption: "So grateful for my family. These are the people who matter most." I zoomed in, counted the chairs. 5 seats, 5 plates, no empty space. They hadn't left a chair out for me. They hadn't even left a symbolic one. It wasn't exclusion anymore. It was erasure. I locked my phone and tossed it onto the couch like it had burned me. For a minute, I stood there in the middle of my apartment, hands on my hips, staring at nothing. A grown man, alone on a holiday, disinvited from his own family. I could have stayed in, ordered delivery, turned on a game, pretended it didn't matter. That would have been easier. But something inside me rejected that idea. If I was going to eat Thanksgiving dinner alone, I wasn't going to do it hiding in the dark. I grabbed my coat. Boston felt colder than usual. The kind of cold that cuts through layers. Snow clung to my boots as I walked. Most restaurants were closed. Windows dark. Chairs stacked upside down on tables. Harbor View Grill wasn't. It was one of those old places with dark wood panels and brass light fixtures. White tablecloths, real candles. The kind of place families had probably been coming to for decades. When I stepped inside, warmth hit me immediately, and noise, laughter, glasses clinking, silverware scraping plates. Belonging. The hostess looked at me with professional politeness that didn't quite hide the pity. Just one, yeah, I said, just one. She led me to a small two-top in the corner, near the kitchen doors, close enough to the largest table in the room that I could hear every word they said. 3 generations, an older couple at the head, a man and woman in their 40s beside them, 2 kids, and a younger woman around my age, dark hair pulled back, laughing at something the older man had just said. They passed dishes without asking, interrupted each other mid-sentence, touched shoulders casually. No tension, no calculation, just ease. I ordered the Thanksgiving special. When the plate arrived, it looked perfect. Golden turkey skin, glossy cranberry sauce, mashed potatoes sculpted into a neat mound. I took a bite, couldn't taste it. The family next to me burst into laughter. The older man must have told a terrible joke, because the kids groaned dramatically before laughing anyway. I felt something crack open in my chest. Not jealousy, grief. This is what it's supposed to look like, I thought. I stared at my plate, and finally let myself understand what I'd been avoiding all day. This wasn't about one phone call. It wasn't about pregnancy or stress. It was about 27 years of shrinking. 27 years of trying to earn a place that was never mine. If I kept trying, kept adjusting, kept apologizing for existing, I'd eventually disappear completely. My vision blurred before I realized my eyes were wet. I turned slightly toward the window, pretending to check the snowfall outside. I pressed my napkin against my face and willed myself to stop. Men don't cry in public restaurants. I almost had it under control. Then I heard a voice beside me. Hey. Warm, calm, concerned. Are you okay? I looked up. The older woman from the big table was standing there, silver hair catching the candlelight, eyes sharp but kind, and she was looking at me like I mattered. For a second, I considered lying. I'm fine, I said automatically. Just allergies. She raised one eyebrow. Not skeptical, just experienced. Allergies usually don't make a man look like he's holding his breath, she said gently. That almost made me laugh. Almost. I didn't mean to stare, she continued, nodding toward her table, but no one should sit alone on Thanksgiving looking like that. Looking like what? Like he'd just been told he didn't belong anywhere. I'm Margaret, she said, extending her hand. Ethan. Her grip was firm, steady. Well, Ethan, she said, glancing back at her family. We have too much food, my husband tells terrible jokes, and my daughter is trying to convince everyone she makes better mashed potatoes than I do. You might as well come suffer with us. I shook my head immediately. I couldn't. I don't want to intrude. You're not intruding, she said. I'm inviting. Big difference. From behind her, the older man at the table lifted his glass toward me. She won't take no for an answer, he called out. 42 years and I've never won. The younger woman, her daughter, I assumed, turned in her chair and looked at me, not pitying, just curious. Open. There was space at their table. An actual empty chair. I looked down at my plate. At the food I couldn't taste, at the napkin still damp in my hand. I'd spent my entire life trying not to take up space, and here was a stranger offering me some. You're sure? I asked. Margaret didn't hesitate. I'm sure. I stood before I could change my mind. The moment I stepped toward their table, something inside me braced for awkwardness. It never came. Someone moved a chair back without being asked. Someone else slid a plate toward me. A glass of wine appeared in my hand, like it had always been meant to. I'm Richard, the older man said, standing to shake my hand. His grip was strong, intentional. This is my wife, Margaret. That's our son Daniel. His wife Laura. Their kids Ava and Noah. And our youngest, Rachel. She gave me a small wave. Hi, Ethan, I said. Thanks for letting me crash your holiday. You're not crashing, Daniel said, already passing me a bowl of stuffing. You're improving the odds that Dad won't tell the same joke twice. Hey, Richard protested. Quality material deserves repetition. The kids giggled. I felt something strange in my chest. No tension, no evaluation, no subtle ranking of who mattered more. Just inclusion. Richard raised his glass. To unexpected guests, he said, looking straight at me. Who make the table better? Everyone lifted their glasses, even me. The toast hit harder than it should have. Conversation resumed like I'd always been there. Daniel asked what I did for work. Laura asked where I grew up. The kids debated whether architects were cooler than astronauts. Rachel leaned slightly toward me at one point and said quietly, "Fair warning. My dad's about to try another joke." I heard that, Richard said, and when he delivered it, something painfully bad involving a turkey and Wi-Fi, I laughed, not politely, not forced, actually laughed. It startled me. At some point between the second helping of mashed potatoes and the pie being sliced, Margaret slid into the chair beside me. "How are you really?" she asked. Low enough that only I could hear. I stared at my plate for a moment. I didn't owe her the truth. But she'd crossed a room for me. "My mom told me not to come home," I said quietly. "Said my sister didn't want drama." Margaret didn't flinch. "And what does drama mean in your family?" she asked. "It means asking why I wasn't invited to things." She nodded slowly. "Ah, I'm not difficult," I added, and hated how defensive I sounded. "I don't think you are," she said. "You don't know me," she smiled slightly. "I know that people who get labeled as the problem usually aren't the ones creating it." That landed hard. "You're not the problem, Ethan," she said simply. No one had ever said that to me before. Not like that. Not without conditions attached. Across the table, Richard was showing one of the kids how to carve a perfect slice of pie. Rachel caught my eye. There was no curiosity about my family drama. No judgment. Just warmth. For the first time that day, maybe for the first time in years, I didn't feel like the adjustable piece. I felt placed. When the check came, I reached for my wallet. Richard waved me off. "Not a chance." "I can't let you?" "You can," he said calmly. "We buy dinner for new friends every Thanksgiving." New friends. As we stood to leave, Margaret pressed a small card into my hand. Her name, a phone number, an address in Brookline. "Sunday dinners," she said, "every week. You're welcome if you'd like to come." I looked at the card like it was something fragile. "I don't want to impose." Rachel stepped closer, shrugging into her coat. "You won't, trust me. My mom doesn't offer twice." Richard clapped my shoulder. "Family's not blood," he said. "It's who shows up." Outside, the snow had started falling heavier. Through the restaurant window, I could see families gathering coats, carrying leftovers, ushering children into the cold. Margaret squeezed my arm. "Think about Sunday," she said. I stood there holding that card, heart unsteady in a way that had nothing to do with rejection this time. I had no idea I'd just met the people who would rewrite my entire life. I didn't go that first Sunday, or the one after. The card sat on my kitchen counter for 2 weeks. I'd pick it up sometimes, turn it over in my hand, then put it back down like it might ask something of me I wasn't ready to give. I wasn't used to being invited without a condition attached. Margaret called the third week, not to pressure me, just to check in. "Thought I'd see how you're doing," she said, like it was the most normal thing in the world. No interrogation, no guilt. By December, I ran out of excuses. That Sunday, I stood on the Morrison porch in Brookline for a full 3 minutes before knocking. The house was warm light and wood, and the kind of place that smelled like something was always baking. The door opened before I could second-guess myself. "There you are," Margaret said, like I was late for something I'd always been expected at. She pulled me into a quick hug, firm, unhesitating. "We saved you a seat." That was the first of many Sundays. At first, I sat carefully, observed, measured my words. "But Morrison's didn't let you stay on the edge for long." Richard started pulling me into things. "Come here," he said one afternoon, setting up a chessboard. "You look like someone who thinks 5 moves ahead." "I design buildings," I said, "not strategies." "Same thing," he replied. "I lost every game for 2 months straight. He never let me win. But every time I left, he'd clap my shoulder and say, 'You're improving.'" No one had ever said that to me without comparison attached. Daniel and Laura's kids took to me faster than I expected. "Uncle Ethan, can you fix this?" Noah asked one Sunday, holding up a broken toy truck. "Uncle." No one corrected him. So I fixed the truck. Then, I helped Richard repair a loose cabinet hinge. Then, I rewired a porch light. Then, I ended up in the backyard playing catch with Daniel while the kids cheered like it mattered. That's how it happened. Not through big emotional speeches, through usefulness, through staying, through showing up again the next week. Rachel and I became friends first. Real ones. She worked in nonprofit housing development, said she liked fixing systems that forget people. That line stuck with me. We'd end up side by side in the kitchen, drying dishes after dinner while the rest of the family argued about football in the living room. "You don't talk about them much," she said once. "My family," she nodded. "I don't have much to say." She studied me for a second, then said, "That's fair. No pressure, no therapy tone, just acceptance." We started texting about small things, movies, work disasters, her dad's increasingly terrible jokes. Somewhere along the way, sitting next to her stopped feeling accidental. It started feeling chosen, and the strangest part, my biological family didn't reach out. Not at Christmas, not on my birthday. Not once. The silence used to feel like proof that I didn't matter. But as the months passed, something shifted. I stopped checking my phone. Stopped bracing for disappointment. For the first time in my life, I wasn't performing for love. I wasn't shrinking. I wasn't trying to win approval. I was just there. At the table, in the room, in the game. And every Sunday, when Margaret would say, "I'm glad you came," I started believing she meant it. It happened 2 years after that first Thanksgiving. By then, Sunday dinners weren't an invitation anymore. They were routine. I had a key to the Morrison house. Richard pretended to hate that I reorganized his toolbox. Margaret pretended not to notice when Rachel and I lingered too long in the driveway after everyone else had gone inside. Rachel and I never had a dramatic, "When did this start?" conversation. It just was. One night we were arguing about whether brutalist architecture was misunderstood. The next, I realized I couldn't picture my life without her in it. I chose Harbor View Grill. She laughed when I told her where we were going. "You're sentimental," she said as we slid into a booth. "I'm strategic," I corrected. There's a difference. The same dark wood, the same brass fixtures, the same corner where I'd sat alone 5 years earlier, trying not to cry into a linen napkin. Only this time, I wasn't alone. Halfway through dinner, I noticed my hands were steady. That surprised me. "Why here?" "Really?" Rachel asked, studying me over the rim of her glass. I looked around the room. "This is where my life changed," I said. "I didn't know it yet. But it did," she softened. "Your mom saw you," she said quietly. "Yeah." I reached into my jacket before I could overthink it. "Rachel Morrison," I said. And she rolled her eyes. "That's not my name, not yet." Her breath caught. "I spent 27 years trying to be chosen," I continued. "Trying to be small enough, useful enough, easy enough to keep." I met her eyes. "You were the first person who never asked me to shrink." Silence. Restaurant noise faded into background blur. "I don't want to earn my place in your life," I said. "I want to stand in it, every day, on purpose." I opened the box. "Will you marry me?" She didn't cry immediately. She smiled first, then her hand came up to cover her mouth. "Ethan," she breathed. "Yes or no," I said, my voice rougher than I intended. "Yes." Not dramatic, not hesitant, certain. "Yes." When I slid the ring onto her finger, applause broke out around us. I hadn't noticed anyone watching. And then I saw them. Margaret and Richard at a nearby table. Pretending they hadn't orchestrated half of this, Richard lifted his glass toward me. Not proud, not possessive, just steady. For the first time in my life, I wasn't asking for a seat at someone's table. I was building one of my own. Wedding planning moved fast. Venues, guest lists, seating charts. And then there was one line on the invitation that stopped me cold. "Parents of the groom." I stared at the blank space on the design proof for 10 full minutes. Robert and Linda Carter. The names felt foreign now. Technical, historical. They hadn't called in over 2 years, not on my birthday, not when I got promoted, not once. You don't get title rights without presence. I was in the Morrison living room when Margaret found me holding the draft invitation, like it was a legal document I didn't know how to sign. "What's the conflict?" she asked. I handed her the page. She read it once. Then again. "Ah," she said softly. Richard walked in halfway through and didn't need context. He'd always been good at reading rooms. "You don't owe anyone a line on that paper," he said evenly. "It's not about owing," I replied. "It's about truth." Margaret exchanged a glance with him. Then she said something that shifted the air in the room. "There is a legal way to make truth reflect reality." I looked at her. "Adult adoption," she said gently. "It exists. It's binding. It's permanent." Richard didn't speak immediately. He just studied me. "It would give you a new birth certificate," Margaret continued. "New legal parents, new next of kin. It would make official what already is." My chest tightened. "You'd want that?" I asked, the words rougher than I expected. Richard stepped forward. "Son," he said. He didn't rush it, didn't soften it, just said it. "If you want us," he continued, "we're here, no guilt, no pressure, just choice." That word hit harder than anything else. I wasn't being reassigned. I was being chosen. The process took months. Paperwork, court filings, a hearing date. Sitting in that courtroom felt surreal. A judge reading legal language that translated into something deeply personal. When the final order was signed, the clerk handed me the document. Ethan Morrison, the name looked strange on paper. Right. Margaret squeezed my hand. Richard's palm rested heavy and steady between my shoulder blades. Afterward, Richard pulled me aside in the hallway. You should have had a father who stood up for you, he said quietly. I swallowed. You do now. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was solid. The new birth certificate arrived 2 weeks later. I held it in my hands longer than I expected to. Not because I hated the old name, but because this one wasn't inherited. It was earned. When the final wedding invitations were printed, the line read parents of the groom Richard and Margaret Morrison underneath. In smaller text, the family who chose him for the first time in my life. The paperwork matched the truth. I should have known the Carters would find out. Families like mine don't disappear quietly. They reappear when there's something public to reclaim. 3 months before the wedding, I got a text from a number I hadn't seen in years. Claire. Is it true you're getting married? No hello? No how are you? I stared at the message. Then I blocked the number. A week later, my phone rang 5 times in one afternoon. Mom. I let it go to voicemail. Every time. Finally, a text. Why didn't you tell us we're your family? Call me immediately. The phrasing almost made me laugh. We're your family. I read it twice, deleted it. 3 years of silence. No birthdays, no holidays, no acknowledgement that I existed. And now they remembered. They had a son. Marcus found me standing in the kitchen that night, staring at my phone like it had personally offended me. Everything okay? He asked. My biological family found out about the wedding. He exhaled slowly. What do you want to do? Nothing. I set the phone face down. I don't owe them access. Not to my life, not to this. He nodded once. No argument, no pressure. But it didn't end there. 2 weeks later, the doorbell rang on a Tuesday afternoon. I opened it without thinking. That was my mistake. Mom stood in the hallway. She looked older, grayer, tighter around the mouth. But her eyes were the same, evaluating, measuring. Ethan, she said, pushing past me before I could respond. We need to talk. You don't get to walk into my home like that, I said, closing the door slowly behind her. Oh, don't start, she snapped. What is this nonsense about being adopted? It's not nonsense. She scanned the room, her gaze landing on framed photos along the wall. Me and Rachel at the vineyard. Me and Richard assembling a crib. The Morrison family at Christmas. Me in the center. Who are these people? She demanded. My family, her jaw tightened. I am your mother. You were. The word landed harder than I intended. You can't just replace us. I met her eyes without raising my voice. You replaced me first. That was one Thanksgiving. It was 27 years, I corrected calmly. She faltered for a second, then recovered. We deserve to be at that wedding. No, she blinked. Excuse me, no, I repeated. You don't get to disappear for 3 years and then show up for the photos. Her face flushed red. You're humiliating this family. I walked to the door and opened it. No, I said, evenly. I'm correcting it. She stood there for a second, like she was waiting for me to crack. I didn't, for the first time in my life. I wasn't bracing for her reaction. I was steady. You'll regret this, she said as she stepped into the hallway. I already regretted it, I replied. For decades. I closed the door, and this time, I didn't feel small. I felt finished. The morning of the wedding was clear and bright. June sunlight spilled across the vineyard like it had somewhere important to be. Rows of grapevines stretched over rolling hills. Neat and intentional, like someone had planned every inch of this landscape with care. I stood in the groom's suite adjusting my cufflinks, staring at my reflection. 5 years ago, I'd stood in a Boston apartment holding a phone that told me I wasn't welcome. Today, I stood in a tailored gray suit, about to marry the woman who had never once asked me to shrink. Richard knocked once before stepping inside. You ready? He asked. His tone wasn't ceremonial. It was steady. I think so. He stepped closer, adjusted my boutonniere without asking. You nervous about marrying my daughter? No, I said honestly. He studied my face. About what might happen, he asked quietly. I didn't play dumb. Yeah. After my mother showed up at my apartment, I hired security. Quietly. Professionally. Just in case. Richard placed a firm hand on my shoulder. Whatever happens today, he said. You are not standing alone. That landed deeper than he knew. I know, I said, and I did. The ceremony was everything I didn't know I was allowed to have. Rachel walking toward me. Sunlight caught in her hair, Margaret dabbing her eyes openly. Daniel trying and failing to look stoic. When we said our vows, I didn't look away. I choose you, I told Rachel. Voice steady. Not because I have to, because I want to. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, something clicked into place inside me. Not fireworks. Alignment. Like a structure finally set on the right foundation. The reception unfolded inside a restored stone barn strung with white lights. Laughter filled the air. Glasses clinked. Music swelled. For a few hours, I forgot about the Carters entirely, until a security guard appeared quietly at my elbow. "Mr. Morrison," he said discreetly. "There are two individuals at the entrance claiming to be your parents." Of course they were. Rachel saw my expression shift. "They're here?" she asked softly. I nodded once. She reached for my hand. "Whatever you want to do." I looked across the room. Margaret laughing with one of Rachel's cousins. Richard showing Daniel something on his phone. My family, let them in, I thought. Not for reconciliation, for clarity. "Let them enter," I told security. "Seat them in the back," the guard nodded. A few minutes later, I saw them. Linda and Robert Carter. Standing near the entrance like guests who'd arrived at the wrong event. My mother's eyes scanned the room, searching. My father looked smaller than I remembered. The MC stepped up to the microphone. Perfect timing. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced. "Before we continue tonight's celebration, we'd like to recognize some very important people." The room quieted. Rachel squeezed my hand. Across the room, I saw my mother straighten slightly. Chin lifting, expectation settling in. "Please join me in welcoming the parents of the groom." I watched my biological mother prepare herself to be acknowledged. Richard and Margaret Morrison. The room erupted in applause. Richard stood first, Margaret beside him, radiant, certain. They didn't wave dramatically, they didn't perform. They simply stood. And the applause grew louder. Across the barn, my mother's face drained of color. Confusion. Disbelief. Calculation. She grabbed my father's arm. "What did he just say?" I saw her mouth form. Robert didn't answer, because he understood. They had been replaced, not in anger. In truth. My mother moved before the applause fully died down. She crossed the room quickly, heels sharp against the wooden floor. "Ethan," she hissed when she reached me. "What is this, my wedding?" I replied calmly. "Who are those people, my parents?" Her face twisted. "You can't just replace us." I didn't raise my voice. "You replaced me first." Gasps rippled faintly from nearby tables. Robert stood a few steps behind her, looking like he wanted to disappear into the woodwork. "This is humiliating," Linda whispered harshly. "You came uninvited," I said evenly. "What did you expect?" She looked around, finally noticing the eyes on us. "You're embarrassing your family." "No," I corrected. "I'm acknowledging the one that showed up." Her composure cracked. "We raised you. You housed me," I said. "You didn't choose me." Silence. That word again, choose. Robert stepped forward then. Voice rough. "Ethan." I turned. He looked older than 5 years should allow. Shoulders slumped, eyes wet. "I'm sorry," he said. Not loud, not dramatic, just broken. The room had gone almost completely quiet. "I should have." He swallowed hard. "I should have stood up for you." The words hit me square in the chest. I'd imagined hearing them before. In the car after graduation. On the porch after my birthday got canceled. On that phone call 5 years ago. "They came too late." "I know," I said quietly. Linda turned toward him sharply. "Robert, stop this." He didn't look at her. "I knew." He continued. "I knew it wasn't right, and I said nothing. There it was. The truth I'd carried alone for decades." I stepped closer. "Dad," I said gently. "Sorry doesn't rebuild years of silence." He nodded, tears falling freely now. "I know." Margaret appeared at my side, not speaking. Just steady. Richard stepped forward next. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't posture. "This is my son's wedding," he said calmly. "And we will not have it disrupted." Linda turned on him. "You stole him." Richard met her gaze without flinching. "No," he said. "You gave him away. We simply welcomed him." The words landed like a verdict. Security moved subtly closer. I lifted a hand before they intervened. I looked at my parents, the ones who made me. "I don't hate you," I said clearly. Linda blinked. Robert looked stunned. "I don't hate you," I repeated. "But I'm done trying to earn something that was never offered freely." I gestured toward the head table. "They chose me. And I chose them." My voice didn't shake. "I'm not erasing you from my history," I continued. "I'm just not giving you a seat at my table anymore." Linda's face hardened. "You'll regret this." I shook my head slowly. "No. I regretted shrinking for you." I nodded to security. They approached gently, but firmly. As my biological parents were escorted toward the exit, something unexpected happened. Applause. Not wild, not mocking. Supportive, not for the drama. For the boundary. Richard placed an arm around my shoulders. Family protects its own, he said quietly. And for the first time in my life, I understood what that sounded like. The doors closed behind the Carters. The music resumed. Rachel stepped in front of me, both hands on my chest. "You okay?" she asked softly. I exhaled. For years, I thought confrontation would feel explosive. It didn't. It felt clean. "Yeah," I said, "I am." And then I took my wife's hand and returned to the dance floor. Not as someone trying to belong, but as someone who already did. The wedding ended in laughter, but the fallout began the next morning. My phone lit up before Rachel and I even left the hotel. Unknown numbers, cousins I hadn't heard from in years, an uncle who never once called me directly. "How could you do that to your mother?" "Family is family, Ethan. Your father is devastated. You didn't have to humiliate them publicly." I read a few. Then I stopped. For most of my life, I would have panicked, would have drafted careful responses, would have explained context, would have tried to be understood. Not this time. I didn't defend myself. I didn't argue. I didn't engage, because the people who needed the explanation had already been in that room. And they had applauded. Around noon, one message came through that made me pause. Aunt Patricia, my dad's younger sister. We hadn't spoken much growing up. She lived out of state, showed up to holidays occasionally. Always watched more than she spoke. "Ethan," her message began. "I heard what happened." I braced. Then I kept reading. "I want you to know I'm proud of you." I stared at the screen. "I saw how you were treated growing up." I said something once. Years ago. "And your mother didn't speak to me for months, but you deserved better. You always did." My vision blurred slightly. Not from grief. From validation. All those years of wondering if I'd imagined it. If I was too sensitive. Too dramatic. Too difficult. No. Someone had seen it. I typed back slowly. "Thank you. That means more than you know." Later that day, my mother posted a long status on Facebook about modern children abandoning tradition and loyalty being replaced by ego. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Instead, I did something I should have done years earlier. I blocked every Carter number still in my phone. Every social media account, not out of rage, out of peace. That evening, Rachel found me on the balcony of our honeymoon suite. Vineyard glowing gold under the setting sun. "You okay?" she asked. I leaned into her. "For the first time," I said honestly, "I'm not carrying them anymore. No anger, no revenge, just release." A year after the wedding, the house felt different. Not bigger, just fuller. Rachel and I bought a small Cape Cod 20 minutes from Richard and Margaret. Close enough for Sunday dinners. Far enough to build something that was ours. The backyard had a crooked fence and more weeds than grass. I fixed both within a month. It turns out, when you grow up trying to be useful, you become very good at building things. What I wasn't prepared for was building a family. Rachel found out she was pregnant on a Tuesday morning. She stood in the bathroom doorway holding the test like it was fragile glass. "Ethan," she said, "I've faced deadlines that could bankrupt firms. I've presented architectural proposals to rooms full of investors. Nothing has ever made my knees go weak like that word did in that moment." I didn't speak. I walked toward her slowly, like any sudden movement might break the reality. "Are you sure?" I asked. She laughed through tears. "Yes, I'm sure." I didn't cry. I sat down on the edge of the bed and pressed my hands against my face, because the first emotion wasn't joy. It was fear. Not of the baby. Of myself. That night, lying awake, I stared at the ceiling and thought about my father. About silence. About standing in rooms and saying nothing when it mattered. I turned toward Rachel in the dark. "What if I don't know how to do this?" I asked quietly. She didn't hesitate. "You do," she said. "You've been practicing for 5 years." I didn't understand what she meant until later. Until I realized fatherhood isn't about perfection. It's about showing up. And I knew how to show up. Margaret cried when we told her. Richard tried not to. He failed. Daniel's kids immediately began arguing about who would be the baby's favorite cousin. And me, I started building. I painted the nursery myself. Soft sage green. Installed the crib with obsessive precision. Double-checked every bolt like structural integrity depended on it. Because in my head, it did. One afternoon, I stood alone in that half-finished room. Hands resting on the edge of the crib. Sunlight filtered through the window. dust floating in quiet patterns. I closed my eyes and pictured a small child standing in front of me one day, asking if they mattered. I made a promise in that empty room. You will never have to earn your place here. You will never compete for oxygen. You will never wonder if you are too much. When our son was born, the world didn't explode into music the way movies suggest. It went silent. Rachel exhausted and glowing. Margaret crying again. Richard standing behind me, hand on my shoulder like he had the day we signed the adoption papers. The nurse placed him in my arms. He was small, warm, completely dependent. And for the first time in my life, I understood something in my bones. Love isn't measured by peacekeeping. It's measured by protection. 5 years after that Thanksgiving at Harborview Grill, we sat around a very different table. Our dining room was chaos. Daniel's kids arguing over roles, Margaret insisting the turkey needed 5 more minutes. Rachel laughing while trying to balance our son on her hip. Richard carving like it was a sacred ritual. I stood at the head of the table holding my son, looking around the room. 5 years ago, I had counted chairs in an Instagram photo and realized there was no place for me. Tonight, there were more chairs than we needed. And somehow, still room. Margaret raised her glass. Ethan, she said, would you like to say something? I looked down at my son, then at my wife, then at the people who had chosen me without condition. 5 years ago, I began. I thought being excluded meant there was something wrong with me. The room went quiet. I was wrong. I adjusted my grip on my son. There was nothing wrong with me. I just hadn't found the right table yet. Rachel squeezed my arm. So, here's to family, I said. The kind that shows up, the kind that stays, the kind that protects the smallest person in the room. Glasses lifted, laughter resumed. And as I sat back down, my son sleeping against my chest, I realized something that would have terrified the 27-year-old version of me. I wasn't afraid of repeating the cycle anymore. Because cycles don't break by accident. They break when someone finally decides to stand up. And this time, I would. There's something nobody tells you about being the scapegoat in a family. You grow up believing you're difficult, too intense, too sensitive, too honest, too much. So you spend years editing yourself, lowering your voice, softening your opinions, apologizing for needs you shouldn't have to justify. You think if you can just become smaller, calmer, easier, you'll finally be chosen. But here's what I learned the hard way. If someone only loves you when you shrink, that isn't love. That's control. Setting boundaries isn't revenge. It isn't drama. It isn't cruelty. It's survival. Walking away from people who repeatedly show you that you're optional isn't betrayal. It's self-respect. Family isn't blood. It's not shared DNA or holiday obligations or a last name printed on a birth certificate. Family is who shows up. Family is who makes room for you at the table without asking you to earn the chair. Family is who protects you when it costs them something. I spent 27 years trying to win approval from people who had already decided I was expendable. Then, I spent 5 years learning what being chosen actually feels like. And once you know that feeling, you don't go back. If you've ever been told you're the problem simply because you asked to be treated fairly, if you've ever been excluded, minimized, or quietly replaced, I want you to hear this clearly. You deserve to be chosen, not tolerated, not managed, not sacrificed for someone else's comfort. Chosen, fully, freely, without conditions. And if the people you were born into can't do that, you are allowed to build something better. Thank you for staying until the very end of this story. If it resonated with you, take a moment to like and subscribe. It helps these stories reach the people who might need them most. And I'd really like to hear from you. Have you ever had to set boundaries with your own family? What happened? Let's talk about it in the comments. Until next time, remember this. You are not too much. You were just never meant for a table that small. This story was created by the Bear Reddit team for entertainment purposes only. Please do not imitate or apply the events depicted under any circumstances.